Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're excited to have over 300 registered attendees for today's webinar, which is eligible for 1 credit from the ACI. Let's get started by giving one lucky attendee a Webinar Wednesday lunch bag for answering this trivia question. Today's sponsor, Innovatus Imaging, is headquartered in Pennsylvania. Which iconic symbol of American independence is located in Philadelphia? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, I want to invite everyone to save the date for our fall MD Expo, which will be taking place at the Hilton Baltimore Inner Harbor from October the 17th to the 19th. We look forward to you joining us for 3 days of learning, networking, and the latest advances in medical technology, products, and services. Registration is now open, and more details can be found at mdexposhow.com. Okay, and let's see who the winner of our Webinar Wednesday lunch bag is, and it is Matt Davis. Congratulations, Matt. Of course, the correct answer is the Liberty Bell. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Innovatus Imaging. Innovatus Imaging sees beyond boundaries to help healthcare professionals provide better patient care. The company offers the widest breadth of repair capabilities, taking a holistic approach by coupling reverse engineering and rigorous testing to ensure the highest quality of repair and yield rates. For more information, visit innovatusimaging.com. Our presenters today are Matt Tomery, VP of Ultrasound Center of Excellence, and Ted Lucidi, Clinical Insights and Customer Experience of Innovatus Imaging. Matt, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you, Linda. As Linda mentions, my name is Matt Tomery. I'm the Vice President of the Innovatus Imaging Ultrasound Center of Excellence. And today we're going to talk about the clinical engineer's critical role in ultrasound accreditation. Ultrasound accreditation is present in many, or if not most, of our large hospitals and medical centers across the country. And there's multiple organizations that are involved with an accreditation. So within a single hospital, you may have different departments that are accredited by different organizations. And a lot of times the clinical engineering department, even though they're responsible for helping maintain that accreditation, they may be unaware of which departments are accredited and by whom. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and some other things. So let's get started. So just a brief overview of our agenda. So we're going to talk about the different organizations. Today we're going to be talking about ACR, which is the American College of Radiology, AIUM, which is the American Institute of Ultrasound and Medicine, and then IAC, which is the Intersocietal Accreditation Commission. So we're going to talk about the testing criteria that each board requires, and some of the common tests that are used using several transducer models. And then we're going to assess the transducer performance in the field by using those various requirements, assembling and acquiring the QC data. And then Ted will join us towards the end to talk about affordable tips to reduce your operational costs while maintaining your accreditation standards. We're also going to spend just a little bit of time on transducers themselves and their construction, so we're a little bit more familiar about what goes into a probe. So what is accreditation? It's a series of peer review processes that essentially allow practices to demonstrate that they meet or exceed nationally recognized standards. So it's very similar to organizations that are ISO certified. So for example, we're 1345 certified, ISO 1345. So we've demonstrated that our quality systems meet international standards. Well, the same applies to healthcare providers. By seeking accreditation and being accredited, you're demonstrating that you meet internationally or nationally recognized standards and that you are continuously improving your internal processes. By the way, as we go through this, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and send them over to Linda via the chat, and they'll be forwarded to me so I can answer any questions as we go through, and there'll also be a Q&A session at the end. So what is accreditation? So accreditation is voluntary. It's not required, but it can assist in filling certain requirements for CMS or insurance providers. And so typically a department will seek a single accreditation board based on their specialty, but again, a hospital, if we look at an overall hospital, we have all these various departments. We have cardiology, we have the OR, we have labor and delivery, we may have a breast center, we have radiology. And so within a single hospital, you may have IAC accredited in the cardiology department, you may have ACR in the breast center, and you may have AIUM in the radiology department. So it all depends on the department, the type of department, and the accreditation body that they want to go through. So we're going to talk about the three popular boards today, the ACR, AIUM, and IAC. And here's what's in common for all these different accreditation organizations. And we're going to do a quick overview on the different requirements, but what we'll focus on today is the quality control aspect. But the overall requirements for accreditation are, first of all, case study submissions. So there's a lot of folks on this call that know me, and some of you may know that I'm actually married to a sonographer, and the organization that she's with is ACR accredited. So in her organization, what she does is she submits a case study. So her exams will be submitted along with the physician's interpretation of those exams. And so the case study she may have to do 5 OBs, and then the physician's interpretation of those OBs would be submitted with that. They also look for personnel education, document storage and record keeping, and policy and procedures regarding safeguarding patients, ultrasound, and equipment. So today we're going to talk about the instrumentation practices or quality control aspect of ACR. And this is, again, where clinical engineering comes in. So obviously we on the technical side are not involved in the case study submissions or personnel education, but when it comes to quality control, that is typically performed by a healthcare provider's service organization, which is usually, if you have an in-house program, it's the biomedical department. So let's start just by taking a quick overview of ultrasound transducer construction, since a lot of the focus of these quality controls, they revolve around the transducer itself. So looking at basic transducer construction, we start with the lens, or the very outside layer of the probe. The lens is called a lens for a reason, because it does mechanical focus of the ultrasound beams. The lens is a crucial component for ultrasound performance. It may be a single or multi-layer material, and it must be ISO 10993 compliant. That is a standard we apply to ourselves. ISO 10993 refers to the biocompatibility of materials. This material is in contact with the patient, and so to do this properly, you must ensure that that material is 10993 compliant. Below that, we have something called matching layers. Essentially, what these matching layers do is they match the impedance of the transducer with the impedance of the body for more effective and efficient transmission of acoustic energy into the body. And that's kind of a mouthful, but what it does is it's just a bridge between the transducer and the body to ensure that we're emitting the acoustic energy into the body effectively. And generally, these matching layers are a quarter wavelength of the center frequency of the transducer in thickness. So if you think about, and I'm not going to do the math here, but if you think about a 5 megahertz probe, and if you do the math and figure out what a quarter wavelength is, some of these materials are beyond paper thin. So then we have the array. The array, its purpose is to convert the electrical energy to mechanical energy and vice versa. So on the output, we're taking electrical energy, hitting the crystals, making them vibrate, which creates an acoustic or a pressure wave into the body. And then when that wave is reflected off of internal structures within the body, they go back and the waves strike the crystals vibrate, and it turns it back into electrical energy. And so if you look at this photograph on the slide, you can see just how small the elements on a transducer is. What we did is we actually manufacture transducer arrays in Denver, Colorado. We have an FDA registered facility there. And this is a photograph of one of those arrays, and you can see the human hair overlaid over a single element. The space in between elements is typically about 1/5 the thickness of a human hair. So you can see how small these individual elements in these arrays are. Beyond the array, we have shielding, which reduces electromagnetic or RFI interference, and it's typically around the array and the backing material. And then the backing material is essentially just for all intents and purposes, it's a backboard for the acoustic wave to ensure it's directed into the body. Beyond that, you can see this graph in the lower right-hand corner of my screen, or your screen. And this is the internals of a transducer. So we have a flex circuit, which connects the interconnect board to our individual elements, and then the interconnect board itself. And you can see this interconnect board has a bunch of IC chips on it. Some conventional and contemporary transducers do some level of beamforming actually in the scan head itself. And then we have the miniature coaxes, which is used to transmit transmit pulses and receive echoes. These are model-specific impedance and capacitance. We also manufacture transducer cables, and we have an acoustic lab in Colorado that benchmarks OEM cables, and there's all kinds of very sophisticated equipment that goes into determining an OEM cable. We do all kinds of tests, including reactive capacitance, and we measure length, we measure diameter, we measure capacitance and impedance to ensure that when we do develop a cable that it meets OEM form, fit, and function. Then we have our strain relief, one of the most common things that does fail on a transducer. The strain relief is designed to allow for hundreds of thousands of flexes. We actually have a machine that we designed to flex a transducer back and forth and actually rotate the scan head, and there's a counter on there. So we use that to test our materials to ensure longevity. And then we have our cable jacket, which protects the main transducer cable, and then the main cable itself. And you see that it contains from 64 to 128 or even more individual coaxial cables. So you can see how these cables can get very delicate, and why they do fail on a regular basis is because there's just so many internal coaxes within a main cable that may be a ½ an inch in diameter. I have a question I'd like to address. It just came through. Can you guys replace a damaged array on an X51 if we are making our own? The answer is we cannot fix a multiplexed, the Philips X51 array. That array, I believe, has 3,040 elements, if I remember correctly. We cannot fix the actual array. We can replace it, but we cannot do an actual array repair on that. We do some level of array repair. We actually have designed and manufactured equipment. It's proprietary to Innovatus, but we can actually use this equipment in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to repair an actual array. We can transplant elements. It's a very cool technology. But on an X51, we nor anybody else, including the OEM, can actually repair an X51 array. You have to replace it when they do go bad. So the ground rules for image testing, consistency is key. And so when you set up a system, what these accreditation bodies are looking for is something deteriorating or degrading over time. And so you have to use the same model and type of phantom, you have to use the same probe, and you have to use the same presets. On an ultrasound system, there may be 15, 20 different presets, and within each preset, there may be between 20 to 30 or even maybe 40 different variables within a preset. There may be an abdominal preset that there may be 3 or 4 abdominal presets within a system, one for pediatrics, one for an average adult, one for a thin adult, and one for a what we term a difficult to image adult or a large adult. And so you have to make sure that you're using the same imaging parameters, otherwise your data is going to be skewed. Focal points, you have to use a minimal number of focal points and ensure that they are maximum depth. So again, consistency. So if we're using an abdominal probe and we're running these series of checks, you want to go to a consistent depth. And so we'll call it 180 millimeters. And you want to make sure that the transmit zone is in the same place, or the focal zone is in the same place every time. You also want to disable software corrections, which for Philips is called XRES, Sonos CT, or tissue harmonic imaging. GE has very similar technology, although they call it crossbeam and octave and harmonic imaging. And then Siemens is tissue harmonic imaging, C-clear, and multi-hertz. And so you want to disable all the software corrections. So again, you have a consistent testing protocols. So out of all our accreditation bodies, we're going to start with the American College of Radiology. So founded in 1924, American College of Radiology accreditation is available across all the imaging modalities. So within ultrasound, ACR can accredit general ultrasound, breast ultrasound, and stereotactic breast biopsy. And if you look, there is actually an ACR logo here. If you go to the ACR website, which I believe is acr.com, they actually publish a list of accredited organizations on their website, and you can download it. I've done it in the past. And so if you're unsure if your organization is accredited by ACR, you can go on their website and determine that. So let's take a look at accreditation requirements for ACR. So we have the acquisition of clinical images that we talked about earlier and the relevant physician reports. But the third component is our quality control documentation. So if we look at the requirements, ACR states this annual survey must be completed once within a 14-month period. They give you a little bit of wiggle room here. And what they're looking for is QC reports from the most recent annual survey performed by the medical physicist or designee. And that's the key word. In the vast majority of cases, there are some places that I'm aware of where the in-house physicist will do these checks, but it's not that often. I believe the Mayo does it, and there may be a couple of other places, but in the vast majority of organizations, the designee, which is typically the service provider, so if you're using the OEM, you would have the OEM do these checks. If you have an in-house program, then clinical engineering would be responsible for these checks. Or if you're using an ISO, independent service organization, they would do these checks. You also have to document corrective action if the annual survey identifies performance problems. So if you go through this annual survey and you state or you disagree that you have a uniform image or that you don't have a uniform image either from left to right or top to bottom, you have just put yourself out of compliance with ACR. And so in order to get back into compliance, you have to demonstrate that you perform corrective action. So if you have a transducer and you're scanning with it, doing these checks, and your transducer has dropouts, and you note those dropouts on the annual survey, you have to show that you address those dropouts. So either you replace that transducer, you send it into Innovatus, we do the repair, something along those lines. ACR also states that uniformity, geometric accuracy, sensitivity, and contrast and spatial resolution must be made using an ultrasound, phantom, or test object. And so if you're doing these checks, you must have a phantom. So when we look at image testing, there's two different kinds of tests, or two different categories of tests, I should say, that ACR is looking for. Under the image testing, these are mandatory, and then we have optional testing. So under image testing, we have uniformity and artifact inspection. So you can see this image over here. I took a snapshot of a transducer we received for repair. This is a Sequoia probe, and you can see this dropout that I have the green arrow on. This particular probe would not pass. You would state that the image is not uniform from left to right. We also want to do system sensitivity. System sensitivity is how deep or how much are you penetrating with that particular probe. And here's where it gets a little bit nebulous. When you scan with an ultrasound transducer and you're scanning a phantom, there's something called a noise floor. And it's where you're starting to lose the actual information of the material within the phantom, and you're starting to get noise. You can actually see pins and objects within an ultrasound phantom below the noise floor. So you have to insert some judgment as to where you believe the noise floor is ended. And then the system display settings. So when you go in to look at an ultrasound system, is the system display set correctly? And the system display you typically have a contrast and brightness setting. That was on the old CRTs. On the new LCD and LED screens, you have similar settings. You want to make sure that you have a nice black background. If you look at this image here, this image that I have on this slide is probably a little bright. If you look at the last step of the grayscale bar on the left-hand side over here, this should be a little bit darker. So this display is a little bit bright, and then your whites should be white but not blooming. A word of caution: I would not adjust an ultrasound system display without coordinating that with the sonographer or the department. Sometimes people like their display set a little differently than optimal. So get permission before you start changing settings on an ultrasound system. Some of the optional tests are geometric accuracy. So you're measuring pins along the axial and lateral resolution, or the axial and lateral planes. We also have contrast resolution. Within a ultrasound system, we have these cystic structures that have different densities, and the purpose of the test is how well can the system distinguish between objects of similar densities, and those are all within the phantom. We have spatial resolution, and then we also have, and this is optional, which is primary interpretation display performance, or a PACS workstation. So if the PACS workstation is on site where the physician, where he or she does the interpretation of the exams, ACR asks you to take a look at that display, again, if it's on site. A lot of organizations do remote reading. Again, I would not go into a reading room if you value your job and start playing around with the display settings for a physician. You'll want to check it and perhaps make some suggestions if it's not set correctly, if there's pixels out, but I would not recommend changing that without permission. So let's talk a little bit about the uniformity and artifact inspection. Again, I have my image up here that shows this dropout. This particular dropout was caused by bad elements within a transducer. Artifacts are typically hypoechoic versus hyperechoic. Hypoechoic is where the image is darker. So if you have channels out within an ultrasound system, or you have elements out within the transducer, or the cable is going bad and some of those miniature coaxials that we talked about are breaking or have broken, you'll get a dark shadow like you see on this image. It can also be the pins or the connector board. You should be inspecting those regularly, and I'll take a brief tangent here. As we go in and look at systems, I've probably performed 20 or 30,000 ultrasound preventative maintenances over the span of my career, and one of the things I did religiously is I always looked at the pins on ultrasound transducers and on the system itself. If you have a bent or broken pin on a probe and you go to plug it in, typically sonographers, if it doesn't go in gently, a sonographer will force the connector into the system and make it lock on. Well, what you've done is you've taken a bent pin on a transducer, and now you've bent or broken a pin on the system itself. Well, it gets worse. So now you have a bent or broken pin on your probe and on your system, and then the sonographer may unplug that probe and plug another probe into that same connector that they just damaged. Now that connector will damage a probe, and so on. And then that probe may go across the hall to another machine, and it kind of spreads like a virus. So if you're working on ultrasound systems, I strongly encourage you to inspect the pins on systems and on probes as frequently as possible. And when you do identify bent or broken pins, take that probe out of service, get it fixed right away. And if that system has a bad connector board, if there's bent or broken pins, put something over that connector so it's not used until you can get a service organization in there or replace it yourselves. But you definitely don't want bent or broken pins because it gets worse. So geometric accuracy, if you look at this graph of this transducer, we have the three different types of resolution within a transducer. We have lateral, which is side to side or perpendicular to the beam of the ultrasound transducer. We have axial, which is parallel to the beam, the transmit beam of the ultrasound transducer. And then we have elevational thickness. So if you think about a CT, something along the lines of a CT is when I'm doing an ultrasound scan, how thick is that slice, that acoustic slice that I'm taking. And what we have here is a graphic outlay. This particular phantom, I believe, is an ATS phantom. I believe this is the ATS 539, if I remember correctly. It's a phantom that we use amongst others. A very good phantom, but you can see that we have pins on the axial plane and on the lateral plane. And then on the right-hand side, we have these targets that are different densities. And so we would scan this for our contrast resolution. Sensitivity. Again, we talked about this. It's the maximum depth an ultrasound transducer can scan. And so this particular transducer, you see that if you can follow my cursor, you see that we have pins on the axial plane. We have pins on the lateral plane. And here's our objects for measuring contrast resolution. You can see this object here. This one has almost disappeared, but we can pull it out. We have another object here, here, and here. But if you look down at the bottom, here's our noise floor right about here, probably right at about this pin here. Oops, hold on, I advanced my slide on accident. So I would say our noise floor is right about here on this particular image. Even though we can see a pin below that, that pin is a very bright reflector, but I believe that, and again, this is somewhat subjective, you would have to make a judgment call and say, I believe, if you look at this texture here, this is a tissue mimicking phantom, and so it does mimic human tissue. I would say that we're starting to lose the tissue texture right about the second to last pin. And then best practice is photo document your system settings. So system display settings. What I did here is, these images are me. Most of these images within this presentation are my anatomy. So this is my liver over here, and my kidney, this football-shaped object is my kidney. This is my diaphragm, this bright reflector down here. The image on the left is a very poorly set up display. This image over here, you see our background is too bright, our whites are blooming. You have a hard time reading the text because the whites are blooming. All I did was I changed these two displays and then took a screenshot. This image on the right is a well set up display. You can see this last bar, or this last step on our grayscale bar, is just falling into the background here, this nice black background. But we're not losing it. You can barely see that last square, and there are 16 steps. And then you can see that our whites, or our contrast, the whites aren't blooming, but they're white. And so this is a properly set up display. We do not see any pixel defects. So I would say this display is perfectly set up. So the way to set up a display is you want to adjust the room lighting to a typical scanning room. Sonographers scan in the dark. My wife actually belongs to a provocatively named sonographer group. It's called Sonographers Do It in the Dark, where sonographers post about all these really cool exams, but they work in the dark all day. And so you do not want to set up one of these displays with the lights on. You want to turn the lighting down to whatever the sonographer uses, and then use the grayscale bar. As you adjust your background density, you want that last square of your grayscale bar just to start falling into that background, so just barely visible, and then adjust your whites to whites. And again, ensure your customer approves and understands any changes that you made. Some sonographers are very picky about their system settings. In fact, most sonographers are, and you do not want to change that without their input and approval. So, pop quiz. Will adjusting the system's main display settings have any effect on the image presentation on a PACS system? So if you look at these two images, the image on the left, I have the background way too bright. And the image on the right, I have the background way too black. Both of these image settings are very, very poor. My question is, will these settings, if you have an ultrasound system set up like either the left or the right, will it affect how images look on a PACS system? At the end of this presentation, you'll have my email address. Please email me your answer, and what I'll do is I'll send out the answer, but I'm curious to see how you folks respond to that question. So the primary interpretation display performance, again, this is the PACS system. It's the same test as the display on the system, but it's designed and performed for on-site PACS workstation. And you can see I say proceed with caution because, again, you do not want to go into a radiologist's office and start changing their monitor. He or she would not be pleased with that. Contrast resolution, again, you see these pins or these cystic objects on the right-hand side. How well can the system distinguish between these objects? And this is optional. Spatial resolution is also optional. So the lateral, axial, and elevational resolution. And you can see this little graph up here where I'm demonstrating this is our axial, lateral, and then our spatial back and forth here. Again, this is optional as well. So evaluation of the quality control program. So ACR asks, have you done an evaluation of your quality control program? Again, this is optional. You know, I look at optional things. When I was doing service, I used to do all these things just because I'm kind of an ultrasound nerd, and if I can do it, I will. But since ACR does make it optional, it's up to you and your organization whether you want to do this or not. So what you do is you do an assessment of your QC program. It does check that appropriate actions are taken to correct problems, and it looks at where you can do improvement, and it compares your QC practices with those of other practices outside your organization. This is a copy of the equipment evaluation summary form. This is from the ACR website. And so all those things that we talked about are all right here. So you look at, this is all your site information. So it's looking for system serial number, transducer number. So what is the serial number? Who's overseeing the inspection? And then down here is your sensitivity. So how deep are you scanning with the probe that you chose to use for these quality control checks? If you go down here to uniformity, which is required, so you're stating whether you agree, disagree, and there's slight uniformities, or disagree and there's major uniformities when you look at the image either from top to bottom or from left to right. Again, once you disagree, where you say, I disagree that my image is uniform from edge to edge, there's no vertical radial shadows, and there's no brightness transitions between the focal zones. If you disagree with that statement, you are basically saying that I am not in compliance. And then again, you have to show corrective action. So if you say, hey, there's dropouts, I disagree that my image is uniform, you have to attach a service report or some type of documentation that states that you fixed that problem. Down here, we have our scanner electronic image display performance. So that's the display on the system. And then he asks for some mechanical checks. ACR has updated this somewhat, although some of these things are a little dated. If you look, these are all yes/no questions about the electrical and mechanical safety. Down here, they ask, are all accessories, VCRs, cameras, etc., fastened securely to the ultrasound unit? I'm an old ultrasound guy. I go back to 1986 when we used to attach actual film cameras to the top of ultrasound machines, and VCRs, they'd be stacked up three or four devices high. We don't do that anymore. We have this cool thing called PACS, and so you don't see those things anymore. And so if you don't have any devices on there, I would just answer yes. There is no NA. There is no NA option, so I would answer yes. And then corrective action required. If you believe there is corrective action required, you have to put that in. But again, if you say yes, there is corrective action required, you have to address what the solution is. Acceptance testing, that's optional, but that is when a system is new and it's coming into the hospital. So your hospital went out and bought a brand new system or systems. This is optional, but ACR says you can do this and you may do this. Or if you have a system in storage and you're bringing it back into service, or if there's something image related that was repaired or replaced. So for example, if you send a transducer into Innovatus for repair and we send it back, you can or you may do acceptance testing. It is optional with ACR at this time. So ACR in the quality control program, they state that they're optional, but then they state a continuous QC program is essential. So they're saying it's essential, but also optional. Interpret that as you will. I've spoken with folks over at ACR, and I don't have a definitive answer for you. But when it says it's optional, then it is, optional means not required. The minimum frequency for quality control tests is semi-annual for all these different tests. And then the quality control checks are different from preventative maintenance. They also state regular preventative maintenance should be performed and documented by a qualified service engineer following the recommendations of the equipment vendor. Well, some machines, some contemporary machines, for example, the GE Logic E9, I've read that service manual cover to cover, and in the back of that service manual, General Electric states that due to the lack of moving parts on that system, preventative maintenance is not required. Well, preventative maintenance may not be required. However, cleaning the filters on a regular basis is certainly required. And if you are ACR accredited, you do need to do these quality control checks, but these quality control checks are not necessarily preventative maintenance. When I was doing PMs in my service life, I used to do the ACR inspection in conjunction with a preventative maintenance. When you do a preventative maintenance, you have your vacuum cleaner out, you have your phantom out, and so on and so forth. You're doing a lot of those things anyways. And so to add the ACR component to a preventative maintenance may take another 10 minutes or so. It doesn't take very long at all. And so I always added that to preventative maintenance. All right, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Ted Lucidi, who's going to talk a little bit about AIUM.
All right, guys. The AIUM has not been around as long as the ACR, and they only accredit departments in the ultrasound modality, thus the AIUM acronym. And just like the ACR, the AIUM has a badge that can be displayed on the clinics and imaging centers that subscribe to this accreditation standard as well. So you could look for that in your facilities. And Matt, you're going to have to switch for me.
Yes.
So, all right. So with the AIUM, the criteria is much less than with the ACR. We spent a lot of time talking about the ACR for this webinar, and it's mostly because they are the most critical and most in-depth type of accreditation program. 15 of the 20 total tasks for the AIUM accreditation need to be performed daily by the sonographers. It's only the last 5 that really need to be performed by someone in a service role or a quality assurance role, such as a physicist or sonographer. And so the AIUM does give some guidelines for maintaining the equipment and looking for some acceptance criteria, as well as the types of documents and tests that should be performed. So go ahead, Matt. All right, and as part of the daily inspections, the sonographers are supposed to look at the condition of their probes, looking for cuts and holes and wear and tear that can contribute to the degradation of a probe. So let's go on to the next slide. The first test that the AIUM asks for is similar to the ACR. They just call it element or channel failure. ACR might call it image uniformity. But what we're looking for is there any dropout, any vertical shadows or vertical flaws that exist. And the AIUM asks users to rate the deficiencies as either a minor flaw or a major flaw. And then the AIUM asks you to rate your probe's performance on that. Are there no flaws present? Is there 1 or 2 minor flaws that are present? 3 or more, and then finally major flaws. But you can see that their criteria allows for several minor flaws to be present, and the probe is still considered operational and acceptable for clinical scanning. And it's not until you have a major flaw to whenever this probe or system becomes unacceptable for clinical use. So we have some guidelines here for performing element or uniformity testing. Always want to use the highest frequency possible with a very shallow field of view. A single point of focus in the very near field, it forces the probe's electronic focusing to focus right outside of the elements. And again, as Matt mentioned earlier, turn off all of your corrections, your harmonics, your sono-CT, and your X-res, because that will mask either a deficiency in the probe or the scanner. Gives a great image, but it can mask a true deficiency. Rules, the next test is the maximum depth of penetration, similar to the sensitivity test with the ACR. The guidelines are, must use same phantom, and you must use the same preset for each probe. So every Philips C51 should be tested using the same phantom and the same preset. And again, a best practice is if you're unsure what to do next time, take a snapshot of the screen as you're performing that initial testing so it can be set up. Or better yet, develop your own preset just for quality assurance testing so that you can just plug any C51 in and choose that preset, and it automatically sets up your system for the same settings each and every time. So for maximum depth of penetration, again, the preset's going to be typical for that type of probe, but suggest a factory or a predefined preset that you establish. We're going to use the center frequency of the transducer, and we're going to allow a deep view of the probe, of the image. And again, a single point of focus, but in this time, we're going to set that focus to the far field because that's what we're trying to, that's the region in which we're interested, is that far field. And a little known setting that you want to make apparent is the acoustic output. Because we're looking for the maximum depth of penetration, you want to make sure your output is set to maximum. All right. And the AIUM's criteria is a little different than the ACR. You truly are looking for changes over time. This could be due to delamination of the lens, degradation of the array, some electronic degradation, or failures. But we're looking for a 5 to 10% decrease in performance or depth until we make a choice to get this probe corrected. And then finally, like the ACR, we are also doing some distance measurement accuracy. I've never really failed a system because the cursors were off or the calibrated calipers were off. But what you're looking for are changes over time, which could lead to degradation, again, delamination of the lens. But there are some guidelines on what you would use for that, and let's see some samples of that type of data on the next slide. So if we're doing vertical measurements, you are going to want to use targets that are a range of targets that are consistent with that type of transducer. So a linear transducer, you're looking for the shallower targets. The abdominal probes, you're looking for a range of targets in the farther field. And you're really looking for a difference in accuracy to be 1.5 millimeters or 1.5% difference between what is reported and what is truly measured. Right now, that image, we should be seeing exactly 4 centimeters, but we're seeing 4.05 centimeters. And you do the same thing with the horizontal measurements. You are going side to side, but you're allowed a little bit more leeway or variance in your criteria, up to 2 millimeters of difference, or 2%. So just like the ACR, the AIUM has some other ancillary tests that you could do, and these are those cystic targets, the grayscale targets, and those. And there are some guidelines there. Again, we're using a center frequency, a consistent depth with that style of probe, whether linear, phased, or abdominal. And again, a single point of focus. So let's go to the next one. And again, some guidelines on what you're looking for. You're wanting to see that all targets are visible. Your targets are round versus elongated. You want to look that your hollow targets do not have any back a fill-in or background speckle. That could be some noise that's being generated either by the system or being picked up by the probe as well. So let's go to the next slide there. And there are some other shots of the grayscale targets. And the next slide, please. And then we're looking for elongated targets or perfectly round targets. We're looking for a difference. And those will change based on the position of your focus. The AIUM does not offer any type of form for assessing image quality. They sort of rely upon you to do this testing and provide that data in the manner in which you see fit. We've created our own form that we are welcome to share with you all. If you do want to do some of this testing, we can share that or help you develop your own. It's just, using either Word or Excel, making a format like that where you can document that. But this also is a nice feature for electronic archival. You can create it as a PDF and upload it into your data management system while you're doing your PMs. And I'll turn it back to Matt.
Okay, so, well, thank you, Ted. I feel like we're on a game show. IAC, this is the third accreditation organization that we'll talk about. IAC is the Intersocietal Accreditation Commission. It used to be two different organizations, ICAL, ICAEL, and ICAVL, ICAVL. The E is for echocardiography, V is for vascular. They combined into this one organization, which is IAC. IAC applies to cardiac and vascular ultrasound departments. They're pretty lenient. They don't have a lot of guidelines. They don't have guidance to the level of quality assurance and image quality testing. They're pretty nebulous. They state you should do routine safety inspections. They say certain equipment must be included in the comprehensive PM program, but it doesn't define the specific criteria. So you need to do a PM. Well, how often? Well, it doesn't really state it. But you must have a policy for instrument cleaning. And for those of you, like I mentioned earlier, I've done 20 or 30,000 PMs, and it's rare that you go into at least a machine that meets my hygienic standards because I'm a germaphobe. But the departments must have a policy for instrument cleaning, which is the transducers, filters, equipment parts, etc. And they recommend that you follow the equipment manufacturer's guidelines for cleaning. Quick tangent on that. We have presented a lot of material today, so we're going really, really fast to try and get this under the wire. But when it comes to cleaning transducers, always follow the manufacturer's recommendations. There are thousands of different transducers out there, and even on the same system, you may have a cleaner that is approved for, or a cleaner or disinfectant that's approved for one probe, but it may not be approved for the transducer sitting right next to it on the same machine. Because these transducers are manufactured out of different materials, and they may be manufactured in different countries for the same OEM. So I'd love to say, hey, there's one cleaner and disinfectant out there that works perfectly good on every single probe made. There isn't. And so please follow the manufacturer's guidelines or contact us, or Ted and I can help you find the proper cleaners and disinfectants for your makes and models. One of the things that IAC implemented a couple of years ago is IAC, if you are IAC accredited, they have mandated that you do electrical safety testing in between every patient. We strongly recommend that, not just for patient safety, but with TE probes. We repair thousands of TE probes per year. And if people do the electrical safety testing in between and pull that probe out of service the moment they see any type of excess leakage, you can potentially save that transducer. One of the biggest killers of TE probes that may render them unrepairable is fluid invasion. And so by doing electrical safety testing, when you get a fail, usually that means that the transducer has been breached in some way, and you need to get it out of there. You need to get it out of the liquid. You need to make sure it's not energized by the machine, because that can blow up the array. And so if you have to document pass fails on TEs and record the corrective action if you did get a failure. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Ted for best practices.
All right.
Ted, we got We got 8 minutes left. Go.
All right there. So whether you're accredited or not in your facilities, there are some things that you can do to reduce your costs while subscribing to these standards, even though they're not in place. And it's realizing one of the things is where is going to occur. You have these probes are being disinfected after every patient. Where is going to occur, and accidents are going to occur despite anyone seeing anything. No one sees a probe being dropped, yet probes are dropped every day. Accidents are going to occur. If you have a service contract on your system, or even you as service engineers, you may only inspect your systems or your probes once or maybe even twice a year if you're really diligent. It's the end users looking at their probes each and every day, identifying opportunities for early detection and prevention, which will in turn reduce your overall cost of ownership. You can see on this probe, the seals are starting to go. Once a seal starts to go and the probe is cleaned, the cleaning agent finds its way inside the probe and destroys the probe from the inside out. So early detection is a must. So we've developed a visual inspection guide, and it is available on our website on the resources page. That is a guide that can be posted in areas where they do sonograms or where they do cleaning of probes to help end users identify, what are the telltale signs? What should I be looking for? Yes, I'm supposed to do a visual inspection, but what am I to look for? So let's go on to the next page here. And again, get with your departments and engage your customers. You as the service engineer, take time with your departments. See if you can engage the manager of your OB department to spend about 15 minutes in their weekly department meeting. Explain the key role that they play in helping to reduce the cost of ownership and the wear and tear on probes. Have the end users do, if they're not going to do daily inspections, at least do them maybe once a week. So the idea is the same sonographer or a different sonographer, but the same time, same day of the week, they inspect the probes and they report on what they see. They engage you, you get the probe addressed as soon as something is seen. And in the end result, you're doing minor repairs versus a catastrophic failure. And just some best practices. Always encourage your sonographers to remove scan gel from probes. Leaving scan gel on a probe can degrade the materials over time. If you are using disinfectants, not if, but when you are, make sure that they are OEM approved, just like Matt said and stated there. Good cable management is a must. Keep your cables off the floor, keep them from getting entangled in the casters. And then T-probes or endocavity probes, store the endocavity probes off the scanner in a designated area. T-probe should always have a tip cover anytime that tip is outside of the patient.
Ted, are you sure we shouldn't be using pillowcases to transport TE probes?
Garbage bags and biohazard bags are just as effective.
Yes, they are. Just as effective at damaging probes.
Yes. And there we have it. Guys, we thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you so much. Linda, we have 4 minutes left. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you. Just a reminder to attendees who submitted some questions, because of the time, I will be sending them to Matt and Ted afterwards, so they will contact you directly. But one question, guys, is there isn't much information about testing in any OEM service manuals. Does Innovatus offer some type of guide or instructions for performing these types of tests?
Ted?
Sure, I can take this. On our resources page on the website, we do actually have a how-to guide for performing the tests that we presented during this session. So it's a multiple page document. We could also do a custom webinar just for your team, or if we're in town, we could do an in-person demo. Bring our phantoms along and we can shoot images for a few hours, getting your team up and running and feeling comfortable using this data.
Okay, your time for just one more. You mentioned leakage testing. Should this be performed by service engineers?
I'll let you take that one too.
Well,
Ted.
I'll take this one. Sure thing. As we mentioned in the presentation, leakage testing really needs to occur between each and every use. You really can't have a biomed or a service engineer running up between every case doing this type of testing. So they do make some off-the-shelf testers that can be placed in echo labs or sterile processing, wherever the disinfecting process is occurring, so that it is caught right away. But leakage testing is one of the primary ways to reduce failure rates or the cost of failure rates on your T-probes.
Okay, that's great. So just a reminder to the attendees, I will be sending your questions to Matt and Ted. So thank you, Ted and Matt, again for a great and very informative webinar. And obviously, thank you again to today's sponsors, Innovatus Imaging. Just a reminder that we have now automated the post-webinar survey and certificate process and hope that you're finding it more convenient. The survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you will receive in about an hour's time. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately. One lucky attendee will still win an Amazon gift card for completing the survey. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. For more information about our upcoming webinars, please visit our website, webinarwednesday.live. So thanks once again for giving up your time to attend Webinar Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, guys.